Big Shaq's world explodes when a 9-year-old boy points at him in front of thousands and says, "You're my dad." The DNA test should have ended the chaos. Instead, it uncovers a secret no one was meant to find. The deeper Shaq digs, the more dangerous the truth becomes. A missing child. A powerful enemy. A cover-up stretching back years. Malik, the man who once controlled Shaq's career, has been pulling the strings all along. Shaq was never supposed to remember. Jordan was never supposed to find him. But now that he has, there's no turning back. Because this isn't just about fatherhood. It's about a stolen legacy. And someone will do anything to keep the truth buried. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the packed outdoor basketball court. The air buzzed with excitement as spectators surrounded the game in progress. The court was alive with the rhythmic squeak of sneakers against pavement, the heavy bass of hip-hop booming from nearby speakers, and the occasional roar of approval as a player pulled off a flashy move. This wasn't just any game. It was Big Shaq's return to the court. Big Shaq, once a rising star in both underground rap and street basketball, was now more of a cultural icon than an active player. He had stepped away from the game years ago, shifting his focus to music and business, but tonight was different. He had been invited to a charity event, a friendly exhibition match where old legends showed they still had game. Dressed in a loose-fitting jersey and fresh kicks, he moved with a smooth confidence, his broad frame making him an intimidating presence on the court. As he dribbled past an opponent and soared for a layup, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Shaq landed gracefully and backpedaled, flashing a grin at his opponent. Just then, a sharp, high-pitched voice cut through the noise. "You're my dad!" The words crashed into the atmosphere like a thunderclap. The energy of the court shifted instantly. The ball bounced away, forgotten. The music, the chatter, the cheers, all of it faded into stunned silence. Heads turned in unison, eyes locking onto the small figure standing near the front of the crowd. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, stood there, his expression both certain and hopeful. He was small, wiry, with skin the color of rich mahogany and eyes that gleamed with determination. He pointed directly at Shaq, unwavering, as if daring him to deny it. Shaq blinked, his breath hitching. His entire body went rigid, his muscles tensed as if bracing for impact. He searched the boy's face, scanning for something, anything that could explain this moment. But nothing clicked. Nothing made sense. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Did he just say? No way. Yo, is this for real?" Shaq let out a short laugh, an automatic reaction, as if he could brush the moment away. He ran a hand over his closely cropped hair, his signature diamond-studded earrings catching the last rays of sunlight. He glanced around, half expecting this to be some kind of prank, but the boy's face remained serious. From the corner of his eye, Shaq noticed a woman, early 30s, tall, poised, but visibly tense. Her hands were clasped together, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was watching him carefully, as if waiting for his reaction. Her face was vaguely familiar, but Shaq couldn't place her. The boy's voice came again, firm. "You're my dad." Shaq exhaled sharply. He wasn't sure if it was from frustration, disbelief, or something deeper that clawed at his gut. "Kid, I don't know what you're talking about." The boy's jaw clenched, his small hands balling into fists at his sides. "Yes, you do." Shaq shook his head, stepping back. This wasn't happening. This had to be a mistake, a joke, a misunderstanding. He had been careful. He had lived his life on his own terms, never tied down, never reckless enough to leave something like this behind. Hadn't he? The woman stepped forward. Her voice was smooth but firm, laced with an edge of control. "His name is Jordan." Shaq's heart slammed against his ribcage. That name? No way. His mouth went dry as memories flickered, fragmented images of the past threatening to break free from the vault he had sealed them in. But he pushed them down. He forced a smirk, shaking his head. "Lady, I think you got the wrong guy." The woman didn't flinch. "Do I?" Jordan stepped closer, staring up at him with those big, determined eyes. "You are my dad." The weight of those words pressed against Shaq's chest, suffocating, undeniable. The world around them had shrunk. It was just him, the boy, and the woman. The crowd didn't exist. The cameras didn't exist. Nothing did. A tense beat passed. Then another. The boy's lips parted, and he spoke the words that made Shaq's stomach drop. "Mom said you'd deny it." Shaq's pulse roared in his ears. His throat tightened. He had faced a lot in his life, opponents, critics, betrayal, but nothing prepared him for this moment. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. And then, just as Shaq opened his mouth to respond, the first camera flashes erupted. The world was watching. Shaq's heartbeat pounded in his ears as the crowd's whispers swelled around him like a rising storm. The boy, Jordan was it, stood his ground, staring at him with an intensity that made Shaq's skin prickle. The kid had conviction, the kind that didn't waver. The flashing cameras, the murmurs, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on him. Shaq hated this. He had spent years mastering the art of being in control, of commanding a room. But right now, he felt like the ground beneath him was cracking open. Lisa, the boy's mother, stepped forward. She wasn't backing down either. Her dark brown eyes held something that wasn't just accusation. It was certainty. "You heard him," Lisa said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "He's your son." Shaq exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. Nah, you got this twisted." He glanced at the crowd, the cameras, the reporters who were already recording every second of this mess. His voice dropped as he turned back to Lisa. "You really gonna pull this stunt here, in front of all these people?" Lisa didn't flinch. "I'm not pulling a stunt, Shaq. I'm telling the truth." Shaq shook his head. "Lady, I don't even know you like that." Lisa reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photograph. She didn't hesitate, just held it out for him to see. Shaq hesitated before snatching it from her hand. The second he looked at it, his stomach twisted. It was an old picture, slightly faded, but clear enough. He saw himself, younger, wilder. His arm was draped over Lisa's shoulders. He was grinning, his signature gold chain resting against his chest. The background was familiar. Some club, probably Miami, judging by the neon glow. The memory stirred something deep in his mind, but it was hazy, distant. Shaq let out a breath. "This don't prove anything. You think a picture means I'm his dad?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "Come on now." Jordan stepped forward, his small fists clenched. "You know it's true." Shaq met the boy's eyes, and for a split second, doubt flickered in his chest. The kid did look familiar. There was something in his jawline, in the way he stood, almost like a reflection of himself at that age. Nah. Shaq pushed the thought away. He wasn't about to get caught up in this madness. Lisa's voice was steady. "You don't remember me, do you?" Shaq clenched his jaw. "I remember a lot of things, but I ain't never been in no serious relationship with you." Lisa let out a breath, shaking her head. "I'm not saying we were in love, Shaq, but we were together. One night." Shaq felt the weight of the crowd pressing in, waiting for his reaction. His stomach twisted again. He had been reckless in his past, sure. He'd had his share of flings. But this? A whole kid? He would have known. Right? Jordan's voice cut through his thoughts. "I don't need a test to know. I can feel it." Shaq rubbed his temples. "Kid, that ain't how it works." But Jordan stood firm. "I know your face. I know your voice. I know." His voice cracked slightly, but he held his ground. "I know my own dad." The gym was dead silent. Even the reporters, who usually shouted over each other, were quiet, waiting for Shaq's next move. Shaq exhaled sharply. His voice dropped, steady and firm. "Listen, I ain't the type of man to walk away from my kid. If you was mine, I'd know, and I'd be there. But this?" He shook his head. "This ain't real." Lisa's eyes hardened. "Then take a test." Shaq's jaw tightened. The media went wild. Shouts erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Shaq, are you denying it? Will you take a DNA test? What do you have to say to Jordan? Online, the fire spread like gasoline on an open flame. Or Shaq scandal, DNA or denial. Is Shaq the father? People were already pulling up old photos, digging into Shaq's past, searching for anything that connected him to Lisa. His phone buzzed in his pocket. His manager, his lawyer, hell, probably half the people in his life were calling. Shaq exhaled and looked back at Jordan. The kid hadn't moved. His face was set in stone, his eyes locked onto Shaq like he was daring him to run. This wasn't going away. And for the first time in years, Shaq felt something he wasn't used to. Doubt. The fallout hit fast. Faster than Shaq could have ever imagined. Within hours, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, calls, social media mentions exploding. The number sign Shaq scandal tag was trending worldwide. Fans dissected every detail, old photos, past interviews, even his song lyrics, looking for clues. The sports networks ran specials titled Shaq's Secret Son. Gossip sites plastered Jordan's face next to his, analyzing their resemblance like it was a damn crime scene. And then came the real blow. Shaq was sitting in his studio when Trey, his best friend and longtime business partner, walked in, face tense. He didn't even say hello, just tossed a folded piece of paper onto the table in front of him. Shaq frowned, picking it up. His stomach tightened as he read the words. Effective immediately, our partnership with Shaq Carter will be placed under review pending further clarification on his recent paternity allegations. A sponsorship deal, one of his biggest, put on ice. Shaq slammed the paper down. You gotta be kidding me. Trey sat across from him, hands clasped. Ain't no joke, bro. I told you this was gonna get ugly. Shaq exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Man, I ain't even do nothing. Some random kid pops up claiming I'm his dad, and now my whole life's supposed to fall apart? Trey leaned forward. It don't matter what's real, Shaq. It's about perception. The internet's already decided you're guilty. The sponsors don't want to deal with the heat. Shaq ran a hand down his face, his patience wearing thin. Nah, hell nah, I ain't going out like this. Trey studied him for a long moment. So what's the move? Shaq clenched his jaw. There was only one person who could clean up this mess. Noah Wright, the best damn lawyer money could buy. Noah's office was sleek, all glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline. The man himself was just as polished. Gray suit sharp, expression unreadable as he gestured for Shaq to sit. You're in deep, Noah said without preamble. And it's getting deeper by the hour. Shaq sank into the chair, exhaling. I ain't the kid's father. Noah steepled his fingers. Then prove it. Shaq's jaw tightened. You sound just like Lisa. Noah sighed. Shaq, you built an empire. That empire is built on trust. Trust with your fans, your sponsors, your business partners. Right now, that trust is cracking. Shaq waved a hand. Man, this ain't a damn scandal. I ain't out here cheating on my wife. I ain't even married. Noah's voice was calm, but firm. You don't need to be. You're a public figure. Your name alone makes this news. He paused. And if this gets out of control, it could ruin everything. Shaq stared at him. You really think it's that bad? Noah met his gaze. It's already bad. The weight of the situation settled deep in Shaq's chest. His life, his career, everything he'd built, was suddenly hanging by a thread. But one question kept gnawing at him. What if there was something he didn't remember? That night, Shaq lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling. Memories tugged at the edges of his mind. Flashes of old parties, the rush of flashing lights, the bass thumping through his chest. Miami, Vegas, L.A. Nights blurred together. Lisa had shown him that picture, the one of them together. The thing was, he couldn't remember that night. Not clearly. Shaq sat up, rubbing his temples. He wasn't proud of everything he'd done back then. He had been young, reckless, high off success. Women had come and gone, faces fading into the background of a life moving too fast. Could he have really forgotten something this big? The thought made his stomach twist. There was only one person who might have the answers he needed: his mother. Shaq hadn't seen his mom in almost a year. Not because he didn't love her, but because their relationship had always been complicated. When he knocked on her door, it took a long moment before it creaked open. His mother stood there, eyes narrowing slightly. Look who finally decided to visit. Shaq exhaled. "Ma, She held up a hand. "Save it. I saw the news." She stepped aside, letting him in. The house smelled like home. Warm spices, old wood, a hint of vanilla. But Shaq barely noticed as he sat down on the couch, rubbing his hands together. His mother sat across from him, watching him carefully. "So, you came here because you think I know something." Shaq hesitated before nodding. "I don't remember her, Ma. Lisa. But she swears I was with her. There's a kid, and he..." Shaq exhaled. "He really thinks I'm his dad." His mother's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. Shaq frowned. "You hesitated." She sighed, folding her hands in her lap. "Shaq, your past. It was wild. There were a lot of nights you don't remember. You were running so fast you never stopped to look back." Shaq's stomach tightened. "So you think it's possible?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "I think there might be things you don't know, and maybe it's time you start looking." Shaq swallowed hard. "Ma, do you know something I don't?" Her gaze held his for a long moment. Then finally she said, "There's someone you need to talk to." Shaq left his mother's house feeling heavier than when he arrived. She knew something. He was sure of it. And now, he had no choice but to start digging into his own past. Because if there was one thing he couldn't afford right now, it was being wrong. Shaq never thought his life would come to this, sitting in a cold, sterile clinic, waiting to prove to the world that a child wasn't his. Across from him, Lisa sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Jordan, on the other hand, looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his small shoulders. His hands were stuffed into the pockets of his oversized hoodie, his gaze locked on the floor. Shaq exhaled. He still wasn't sure how he got here. One viral moment, one accusation. And now, the whole world was waiting for an answer. A nurse finally called them in. The test itself was simple: a swab, a signature, and a promise that the results would take a week. 7 days. 7 days for Shaq to keep pretending his life wasn't unraveling. As they stepped out of the clinic, cameras were already waiting. The flashes hit like lightning, and the reporters pounced. "Shaq, what do you have to say to your fans? Do you believe Jordan is your son? What happens if the test is positive?" Shaq gritted his teeth, guiding Jordan toward the car without answering. But just before they got in, Jordan turned, looking straight into the cameras. "It doesn't matter what the test says," the boy said. "I already know the truth." Shaq felt something in his chest tighten. He didn't say a word the whole ride home. The days passed slow, too slow. Shaq tried to go about his life, but everywhere he went, the whispers followed him. His name was in every headline, every news segment. He was being dissected like a science project. But what caught him off guard the most was Jordan. Lisa had agreed to let Jordan stay with Shaq a few nights while they waited for the results. Shaq didn't know why he agreed. Maybe out of guilt, maybe just to prove to himself that this kid was wrong about everything. But the more time they spent together, the more something started to nag at him. Jordan wasn't just some random kid. They moved the same. They laughed at the same dumb jokes. Jordan dunked his fries in his milkshake, just like Shaq did. He drummed his fingers against the table absent-mindedly, the exact way Shaq had done since he was a kid. And the way he shot hoops? His form was raw, but familiar. Too familiar. Shaq watched him from the side of the court one evening, arms crossed. Jordan had been shooting for almost an hour straight, determined to perfect his release. "You bend in your knees too much," Shaq finally said. "Keep your stance solid." Jordan wiped sweat off his forehead and adjusted. The next shot? Pure. Shaq felt something stir inside him. He wasn't sure he liked it. That night, Shaq lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He kept telling himself it was all coincidence, just random similarities. But then, a flash, a night long buried in his past. He was in Miami. The club was packed, music thumping through his bones. He had been drinking, but not enough to forget everything. A woman. Her face was blurred, but the name whispered through his mind like a ghost. Lisa. His heart pounded. He remembered her now. Not just the night at the club. Not just the picture she had shown him. There was more. A conversation. A promise. Something he had been too young, too reckless to take seriously. And now, all these years later, it had come back to haunt him. The clinic called exactly 7 days after the test. Shaq sat in his car outside the building, hands gripping the steering wheel. Trey was in the passenger seat, watching him carefully. "You ready for this?" Trey asked. Shaq didn't answer. He wasn't sure he wanted to know anymore. But he had no choice. Inside, the doctor sat them down, the sealed envelope in his hands. Shaq's palms were sweaty. Jordan was next to him, looking calm. Too calm. Like he already knew. The doctor cleared his throat. "We ran the test twice, just to be sure." Shaq swallowed hard. "And?" A pause. Then, "You are not Jordan's biological father." Silence. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Shaq blinked. He had been so sure, so damn sure, that this kid was his. Lisa gasped. Jordan's hands tightened into fists. Shaq didn't know what to feel. Relief? Confusion? Then, the doctor hesitated. "There's something else." Shaq's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The doctor set the paper down, glancing between Shaq and Jordan. "We ran some additional markers," he said carefully. "Jordan isn't your son, but..." He paused. Shaq leaned forward. "But what?" The doctor exhaled. "There's a genetic match." Shaq's pulse pounded in his ears. The doctor's next words shattered everything. "Jordan is related to you." Shaq's world tilted. Related? Not his son, but still family. The room spun. Lisa looked just as shocked as he felt. Jordan's voice was quiet. "I don't understand." Shaq barely heard him. His mind was racing. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This was something bigger. Much bigger. Shaq stood outside the clinic, the cold air, biting at his skin. Trey was next to him, arms crossed. "This don't make sense," Shaq muttered. Trey exhaled. "It means someone in your family." Shaq shook his head. "I don't got no long-lost brothers." Trey was quiet for a moment. Then, "What about your father?" Shaq froze. He hadn't spoken about his father in years. The man had walked out when Shaq was just a kid. He barely remembered him. But now, a sick feeling settled in his stomach. Was it possible? Could his own father have... Shaq didn't want to finish the thought. But deep down, he knew. The past had come knocking, and this time, he couldn't ignore it. Shaq sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The words kept echoing in his head. "Jordan isn't your son, but he's related to you." It had been 3 days since the DNA results came in, and Shaq still hadn't wrapped his mind around them. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the confusion on Jordan's face, the shock in Lisa's eyes, the heavy silence in that cold clinic. He had come here thinking he'd prove the kid wrong, that he'd walk away with his life intact. Instead, he was drowning in questions with no answers. And there was only one person who could give him the truth. Lisa. Shaq stood outside Lisa's apartment, his heart beat heavy in his ears. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised to see him. "I was expecting you," she said quietly. Shaq exhaled sharply. "Good. Then let's stop playing games." Lisa stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was small but neat. A few of Jordan's drawings were taped to the fridge, the sight of them making Shaq's chest tighten. Lisa turned to face him, arms crossed. "You want answers?" Shaq clenched his jaw. "Damn right I do." A long pause. Then Lisa sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I never lied about being with you, Shaq. We were together once. But you weren't the only one." Shaq stiffened. "What do you mean?" Lisa swallowed hard. The night Jordan was conceived, there was someone else. But it's not what you think. Shaq narrowed his eyes. Then explain. Lisa hesitated. I didn't know at the time, but Jordan wasn't conceived naturally. Shaq's stomach dropped. What the hell are you saying? Lisa took a deep breath. Jordan was part of something illegal. Something I didn't understand until it was too late. Shaq felt a chill crawl up his spine. Lisa, start making sense. Lisa's voice wavered. Jordan wasn't just my child. He was chosen. Shaq's mind reeled. Chosen? Chosen for what? Lisa swallowed. For Malik. Silence. The name hit Shaq like a punch to the gut. Malik. A name he hadn't heard in years. A name he never wanted to hear again. Malik had been more than just a music producer. He was a kingmaker, a power broker, a man whose influence ran deep in the industry. Shaq had worked with him early in his career, back when he was young, hungry, and blind to the dangers of the business. Malik had connections. He could make or break artists overnight. And he never did favors for free. Shaq had cut ties with him years ago, after seeing too much, things he wished he could forget. But now, Malik's name was back, tangled in this mess. Shaq stared at Lisa. What the hell does Malik have to do with Jordan? Lisa looked away, guilt flashing in her eyes. I was desperate, Shaq. I was young, broke, and Malik offered me a way out. Shaq's stomach turned. A way out? What does that mean? Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. He arranged Jordan's birth. Shaq felt like the room was tilting. What? Lisa's hands trembled. I didn't ask questions back then. Malik said he had a program, a way to help women in bad situations. He paid for everything, the doctors, the hospital. He told me Jordan would have the best life, the best opportunities. I thought I was doing the right thing. Shaq's mind raced. And you're telling me you never questioned why? Lisa's throat tightened. I did. But by the time I started asking, it was too late. Shaq exhaled sharply, pacing the room. His hands clenched into fists. He had thought this was just a paternity test gone wrong, but now it was something else entirely. Jordan wasn't just some kid caught in the middle of a mistake. He was part of something bigger, something planned. And if Malik was involved, that meant danger. Shaq pulled out his phone the second he left Lisa's apartment. He needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. Noah picked up on the second ring. Tell me you're calling with good news. Shaq's voice was tight. I need you to look into Malik. A pause. Malik? Yeah. Shaq ran a hand down his face. Something's not right. Lisa just told me Malik arranged Jordan's birth. Paid for everything. Noah let out a slow breath. That's not good. Shaq clenched his jaw. I need to know why. Noah hesitated. Shaq. You know Malik ain't the type of man you go digging into. Shaq's grip tightened on his phone. Do it anyway. A long silence. Then Noah muttered, all right, but be careful. Shaq hung up, his chest tight. He had spent years trying to escape his past. Now it was coming for him. Shaq felt it before he saw it. That prickle on the back of his neck. The sense that he was being followed. It started small, subtle things. A black SUV parked a little too long outside his studio. A man in a hoodie watching him from across the street. At first, he told himself he was being paranoid. But then, the texts started. Unknown number. Stop asking questions. Unknown number. You don't want to know the truth. Shaq's jaw clenched as he stared at his phone. He had spent his whole life fighting. Fighting for respect. Fighting for success. Fighting to be better than the man who walked out on him. And now? Now he was fighting for Jordan. He didn't know what Malik had done. Didn't know why Jordan had been chosen. But he was going to find out. No matter the cost. Shaq sat in his car, staring at the message on his phone. Stop asking questions. A chill crawled up his spine. He had been expecting this. Ever since Lisa told him Malik had arranged Jordan's birth, he knew he was stepping into something dark. Something bigger than he had imagined. But this? Someone watching him? Sending him warnings? That meant he was getting close. He tightened his grip on the wheel. He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when Jordan's life was caught in the middle of this mess. The call came just after midnight. Shaq was in his studio, going through old notes, trying to connect the dots when his phone buzzed. Lisa. His stomach tightened as he answered. "What's wrong?" Her voice was shaking. "Shaq, Jordan's missing." The room tilted. "What?" Lisa's breath was ragged. I put him to bed. He was fine. And then," she let out a sob. "He's gone. His window was open. I don't know where he is." Shaq's pulse pounded. He was already on his feet, grabbing his keys. "Did you call the cops?" Lisa hesitated. "Yes, but Shaq, before he disappeared, I got a message." Shaq's stomach dropped. What did it say? Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Stay out of it, or you'll never see him again." By the time Shaq got to Lisa's apartment, the place was swarming with cops. Lisa stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. She looked up at Shaq, eyes filled with fear. "They took him," she whispered. Shaq clenched his jaw. He had felt a lot of things in his life: anger, pain, regret. But this was different. This was rage. He turned to one of the officers. "Any leads?" The cop sighed. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Kid knew whoever took him. Shaq's hands curled into fists. This wasn't random. This was calculated. This was a warning. And whoever was behind it wanted to make sure Shaq never found the truth. Shaq paced outside, his mind racing. Malik had to be behind this. He was the only one with enough power to make a child disappear without a trace. But how? How did he always stay ahead? Then a thought hit him. Someone was feeding Malik information. Someone close. Shaq's stomach twisted. He pulled out his phone and dialed Noah. His lawyer picked up instantly. "Noah," Shaq said, voice tight. "I need you to dig deeper into Malik." Silence. Then, "I can't do that, Shaq." Shaq's blood ran cold. "What?" Noah exhaled. "Let it go, man. Walk away." Shaq gritted his teeth. "You're in on this." Noah didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I tried to keep you out of it, Shaq. I really did. But you kept pushing." Shaq's hands trembled. "Where's Jordan?" "I don't know," Noah admitted. "But I do know this. Malik doesn't play fair. You were never supposed to find out." Shaq's mind reeled. The threats, the messages, the missing child. It all made sense now. This wasn't about fatherhood. This was about power. And Shaq was never meant to get this close to the truth. Shaq clenched his jaw. "I don't care what Malik wants. I'm getting Jordan back." Noah sighed. "Then you better be ready for what comes next." The line went dead. Shaq exhaled, gripping his phone so tight his knuckles turned white. They had taken Jordan. They had tried to silence him. They had betrayed him. But they made one mistake. They thought Shaq was going to walk away. They were wrong. Because now it was war. Shaq stood outside the towering glass skyscraper, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. This was it. Malik was inside. And so was the truth. The city lights reflected off the building's smooth surface, making it look almost untouchable, like the man who owned it. But Shaq knew better. Malik wasn't untouchable. He was just a man. A powerful, dangerous man. But Shaq had something Malik didn't. He had nothing left to lose. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The elevator ride was eerily silent. As the doors slid open, Malik's office stretched out before him, an expanse of glass, steel, and power. And there he was. Malik sat behind a sleek black desk, fingers steepled, eyes cold. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said, voice smooth as ever. Shaq stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Where's Jordan?" Malik smirked. "Safe." Shaq's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Malik leaned back, studying him. "You've caused quite the mess, Shaq, digging where you shouldn't, asking questions that were never meant to be answered." Shaq's pulse hammered. "Tell me the truth." Malik exhaled, almost amused. You think you're ready for it? Shaq didn't blink. Try me. A long silence. Then, Malik's smirk faded. The reason Jordan called you dad isn't because of biology, he said. It's because of legacy. Shaq frowned. What the hell does that mean? Malik's gaze darkened. Jordan was never meant to be yours. He was meant to be mine. Shaq's breath hitched. Yours? Malik stood, walking toward the window. Years ago, I started a program. A way to ensure my legacy lived on. Carefully selected women. Carefully selected men. He turned back to Shaq. You were one of them. Shaq felt his stomach drop. Malik continued, voice calm, controlled. Jordan was created with intent, not by accident, not by love. He was designed. Shaq shook his head. Nah, hell nah. Malik tilted his head. Why do you think Lisa never had answers? Because she wasn't meant to. She was a vessel. Nothing more. Shaq's hands clenched. You're telling me Jordan was part of some experiment? Malik smiled. Not an experiment. A future Shaq's chest tightened. So what? You were just gonna take him? Raise him to be like you? Malik's eyes gleamed. He was never meant to find you, Shaq. You were supposed to forget. But somehow fate had other plans. Shaq's mind raced. The missing pieces clicked into place. The reason Lisa had been chosen. The reason Malik had paid for everything. Jordan was never meant to have a father. Because Malik had already decided who he belonged to. Shaq took a step forward, his voice steady. You don't own him. Malik chuckled. And what are you going to do about it? Shaq exhaled, his heart pounding. I'm taking him. Malik's expression turned cold. You think you can walk out of here with him? Shaq didn't flinch. Watch me. Malik sighed, shaking his head. You don't understand what you're walking into. Shaq's voice was razor sharp. Nah, you don't understand what kind of man I am. A tense silence. Then, Malik smirked. If you walk out that door, you lose everything. Shaq swallowed hard. His career, his sponsorships, his reputation. If he did this, there was no turning back. But then he thought of Jordan. The way the kid looked at him. The way he had fought for him. And suddenly, the choice wasn't hard at all. Shaq exhaled. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. By the time Shaq reached the lobby, his phone was already ringing. Noah. He answered, voice tight. What? Noah sighed. You really just walked out on Malik? Shaq's jaw tightened. Yeah, and now I need your help. A pause. Then Noah muttered, You're crazy. Shaq exhaled. Maybe, but we both know Malik's been running this city for too long. It's time someone stopped him. Noah was silent. Then, I hope you know what you're doing. Shaq didn't, but for the first time in his life, he knew exactly who he was fighting for. The safe house was quiet. Shaq stepped inside, his chest tightening when he saw Jordan sitting on the couch. The kid looked up, eyes tired, scared. Shaq swallowed hard. You okay? Jordan hesitated. Then slowly, he nodded. Shaq sat beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Jordan's voice was small. Why did you come for me? Shaq exhaled. Because you deserved better. Jordan studied him. Even after the test? Shaq's throat tightened. Then, finally, he said, Blood don't make a father, kid. Showing up does. Jordan's eyes watered. And for the first time, he leaned into Shaq's side. Shaq placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his own eyes burning. He had walked into this thinking he was proving a stranger wrong. Instead, he had found a son. As Shaq stepped outside, the night air was cool against his skin. Trey was waiting by the car, arms crossed. So what now? Shaq exhaled. We go public. We expose Malik. Trey whistled. You sure about that? He won't go down easy. Shaq looked back at the house where Jordan was safe inside. Then, he turned back to Trey. I don't care. Trey smirked. Guess we're really doing this. Shaq nodded. Yeah, we are. Then he pulled out his phone and made the call that would change everything. Because this was never just about him. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. And it was finally time for the truth. The truth was never meant to come out. But now that it has, what happens next? Shaq thought he was fighting for answers. Now he's fighting for something much bigger. A stolen legacy, a dangerous conspiracy, and a boy who was never supposed to find him. But this is just the beginning. What would you do if your past came knocking? And it wasn't just your past. Follow Shaq's journey, uncover the secrets, and be the first to know what happens next. Stay connected for exclusive updates, behind-the-scenes twists, and the next chapter in a story that refuses to be buried. The truth is out. Now it's time to finish the fight.